I'm Zarina Matcha, and you're watching Non-Feminist Gal. One of the largest and most prominent myths of feminism is the myth of patriarchy. This is the view that women have been oppressed since the dawn of time, that we have never been able to work outside of the home, that men have held all positions of political power throughout human history, and that men oppress women by turning women into domestic servants and second-class citizens. This viewpoint is integral to feminism, and what I see as one of the core problems and lies of feminism. The idea that we have lived in an oppressive patriarchy since the dawn of time is nothing more than historical revisionism invented by feminists to make women believe that they needed feminism to have careers, thrive economically, and find purpose in their lives. It also taught women that being a wife and mother is oppressive, and that being a housewife was akin to a life of servitude. Before continuing, I would like to stress that I myself am very much a proud career girl and think there's nothing wrong with a woman not wanting to get married and have children. I don't think that any woman should be forced to have a child, and I don't agree that all women are made to be mothers. Some mothers can indeed be neglectful and even abusive towards their children. While I do not think that abortion is a morally good thing, and do not think that it should ever be used as a form of birth control, I do think that no child should be born to a mother who didn't want them. Every child deserves to be wanted, loved, and cherished. But overall, most women, including myself, do desire to have children someday, and almost every woman desires long-term romantic commitment and stability. Very few women dream of ending up unmarried and alone by the time they're in their 40s. Marriage, or romantic commitment in general, ensures that people have a lifelong partner whom they can share and navigate their life with. I do think that romantic commitment is a positive thing, although I don't think that Western society, specifically in the UK, really helps or teaches people how to go about actually having successful, long-lasting relationships. Critiques of feminism, like myself, cite an alternative view of gender relations. Instead of living in an oppressive patriarchy, men and women have actually worked together in complementary gender roles since the dawn of human civilization. This is called complementarianism, the idea that men and women are equal in our value, which we definitely are, but we have different roles and needs. The term complementarianism is rooted in the Judaic religions, but even on an evolutionary biological level, it certainly holds up. Men and women worked together with our different gender roles to build and create families, tribes, and stable communities. In ancient times, men were the ones who hunted and women were the ones who gathered. Men slaved the wild animals and protected the family, while women gathered the food and cared for their children. In the post-agrarian age, the family unit was also set up with division of labor in mind. Men worked out of the house and women worked in the house. A wife was never a man's property. The family unit was viewed as one single unit. Women taking the husband's name was about ensuring paternity and the passing of lineage. All of this was just division of labor and working together. It was nothing to do with oppressing anyone or saying that people had to do this and that. I'm not saying that things were perfect, by the way, or that societies weren't still awful in various ways, but I am saying specifically as pertaining to men and women and how we interacted with one another, saying that all of human history has been a patriarchy where women had no rights and were oppressed and were just forced to stay at home cooking and cleaning sounds extremely conspiratorial, and it certainly isn't true. This idea is completely absurd. Men are naturally physically stronger than women, usually, and typically more goal-oriented than women, typically better at making logical decisions than women, and usually have a greater desire to protect and provide for women. Women, on the other hand, are typically more emotionally intelligent than men, more cooperative than men, and more community-oriented than men, and more geared towards being caring and nurturing. This is a generalization, but it's got some overarching truth to it. Luann Brizardine, an American neuropsychiatrist, has published 2 books called The Female Brain and The Male Brain, which break down the science between our gender differences extremely well. The End of Gender by Dr. Deborah So is another book that really breaks down our sex and gender differences very well and explains how and why we are different. And it does this in a way that's a bit more accessible to people who are not necessarily as scientifically inclined, such as myself. It's a really good book to really understand gender relations. I am planning on doing a future video reviewing The End of Gender, as I think it's a wonderful book that everyone should read in order to get a really basic and positive understanding of our sexual and gender differences. Big recommend. It's incredibly insane that in today's world, saying that men and women have some fundamental evolutionary hardwired differences is now controversial. Of course, on a basic human level, we are all very similar, and we do desire the same things in life, i.e. happiness, love, long-term contentment, etc. But how men and women go about these things does typically differ. This is a fact, and it should not be controversial. Even on a spiritual level, there's a difference between masculine and feminine energy. The universe is made up of polarities, yin and yang, light and dark, good and evil. The masculine and the feminine are designed to work together and complement each other. The action-driven Mars works with the more sensual, fluid Venus. This is how we have viewed our gender relations always, and it's so stupid now how this is controversial. No one is saying here that women can't be lawyers or run countries, or that men can't be nurses or stay-at-home dads. As I said earlier, I am a career woman, and I've always been very purpose-driven, goal-oriented, and ambitious. Yet that drive for ambition and purpose is a very masculine trait. That's just a fact. Masculine energy is direct and assertive, and feminine energy is softer and gentler. We are a combination of both masculine and feminine energy on a spiritual and scientific level. It just so happens that men have a bit more masculine energy and masculine traits, while women have a bit more feminine energy and feminine traits. Pretty much all of humanity collectively agreed upon this basic fact up until a few decades ago, with the rise of cultural Marxism and historical revisionism. Western feminism kicked off in 1963 when Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique. Friedan's assertion was that American women, specifically suburban housewives, were being oppressed and chained to the kitchen sink. Somehow, this led to some false, absurd, historical revisionist narrative that society had been set up to oppress women as housewives. Much of Friedan's ideas and the subsequent ideas that came from feminism were based on a cultural Marxist view of history. Cultural Marxism is essentially a theoretical look at history through the lenses of various groups of people being oppressed. I have already done a video on this, breaking down cultural Marxism and what it means, if you fancy giving that a watch. Cultural Marxism poses that gender is a social construct rather than a biological reality. The classical scientific view of gender is rooted in biology. Even religions, funnily enough, follow the scientific view of gender, which is rather ironic. Because again, complementarianism is a big part of the Abrahamic religions. Even religion recognizes that men and women are different. It seems the only set of ideas that believes that gender is some made-up construct is social constructionism, even though there is much evidence to the contrary. Most of the people who are out there claiming that gender is a social construct and there's no difference between men and women and we're all the same and sex is bimodal have no scientific background, no biological underpinnings. Their ideas are rooted in theories written by people who took their ideas based on abstract theoretical garbage. There's no scientific basis in what they are saying, and it's extremely dangerous how we are allowing people who have not actually studied biology, who have not actually studied neuroscience and brain differences to essentially dominate the narrative on sex and gender. This is extremely dangerous, and I really, really do commend Deborah So for the work she's done on this. When Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique, she forgot that a mere 2 decades prior, women were out in the workforce taking on men's jobs during the Second World War. The period of calmness and domestic peace in the aftermath of the war allowed for women to return to a state of tranquility in the home. Yes, for some women this would have been tough, but there was nothing stopping them from getting a job, going to university, pursuing a hobby, and so on. Technological advancements and inventions in the post-war era, such as refrigerators, dishwashers, and electric ovens, are what gave women more free time to take up leisurely activities. Spending less time on housework meant that housewives now had more free time, including the time to be bored enough to write the feminine mystique. The rise of efficient kitchens gave middle-class Western women the freedom to turn to pursuits away from housewifery. The contraceptive pill, invented by men, allowed for women to plan when to have children, as well as give women the time to delay having children to pursue a career or higher education, or even opt out of having children if they decided to. None of this was thanks to feminism, and none of it owes anything to feminism or even has anything to do with feminism. Feminism loves to take credit for things that it really had very little to do with, things that were more thanks to social progress and human innovation. Phyllis Schlafly, an American conservative activist, was a well-known public figurehead who spoke out against the feminist movement. She was happily married with 6 children and had a career in politics and in law, and also wrote several books, including The Flip Side of Feminism, which she co-wrote with Suzanne Benker. That doesn't sound like an oppressed woman to me. Her achievements had nothing to do with feminism paving the way for her to go out and do things in the world. She wasn't a feminist, and yet she achieved a hell of a lot. I do think that one of the reasons why some people may be scared to accept or admit that there are basic scientific differences in the way in which men and women think about the world is out of fear that this might somehow suppress women's potential from achieving things. If we say that women are typically more nurturing and more maternal, some people may then worry that this may be used to say that women cannot have careers or women cannot go out and achieve things. However, I've just given you the example of Schlafly, who was never a feminist and still managed to achieve a lot outside of being a housewife. We can even look at some other American women who did things way before the suffragettes campaigned for the right to vote. In 1762, Anne Franklin, sister of Benjamin Franklin, was the first female newspaper editor in America. In 1776, Margaret Corbin fought alongside her husband during the American Revolution. In 1835, Harriet Kezia Hunt was one of the first American women who opened a medical practice with her sister that focused on women's illnesses. She also campaigned for women's rights and education. In 1855, Anne Elizabeth McDowell was the first American woman to publish a newspaper named Women's Advocate, where every employee was a woman and they were all paid the same as their male employees in those fields. This is just a handful, by the way, of the scores of women out there who have indeed done more than be stay-at-home housewives within the last few centuries without being part of any feminist movement. Although historical revisionism would wrongly label these women as feminists today, as proto-feminism likes to assume that any woman who came before the 60s was also somehow a feminist. I even have a video on 20 women throughout history who had and do have successful careers without being out and proud feminists. If there was a patriarchy trying to oppress these poor women and force them to be stay-at-home housewives, then it clearly wasn't doing a very good job. It clearly isn't doing a very good job for me. If the United States was this horrible, oppressive patriarchy where women weren't allowed to have careers, why would all of these women have achieved all of these wonderful things and had careers without the aid of feminism? People have certainly been oppressed and discriminated against in America and suffered horrendous hardships, but those people have certainly not been white, upper middle class, Anglo-American women. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that sexism has never existed or that women have never faced social hardships. But what I am saying is that women have always been headstrong and always been able to get things done. I do not believe that women are or ever have been oppressed. Individual strength and determination always counts for far more. It does seem that whenever things may have been tough for women, we have always managed to come out of the other side. Does that sound like oppression or resilience? And I must also add that things were also tough for men. Feminism loves to completely ignore this, but the majority of men did not hold high positions of political power in most societies. This is another thing that feminism gets horribly wrong. It falsely assumes that men have held all of the power across human societies when that really isn't true. Throughout most of human history, specifically post-agrarian industrial history, a small minority of people, usually monarchists, held positions of power. The average man was just as oppressed as the average woman was, in matter of fact. Why was he somehow less oppressed from being able to have a job when that job was most likely in a factory or in a field? If I had to choose between working in a factory for 10 hours or being at home with my children, then I would rather prefer to be at home. And that's what most women wanted, and what most men worked hard to provide for, to take care of their wives and children, not to oppress them. And most women express gratitude and thanks for this because men and women have always worked together. But needless to say, citing a few women who have managed to have careers within the last few centuries before feminism isn't enough to dismantle this absurd myth of patriarchy. We need to look even deeper into other parts of society. There have been plenty of non-patriarchal societies all throughout human history, where both men and women have held equal positions of political or military power. This alone pretty much debunks the idea that all of humanity has always been a patriarchy, and that women have always been relegated to the role of housewife, which only didn't exist within the last 6 decades. One example is the Scythians, a group of ancient tribes of nomadic warriors who originally lived in what's now known as southern Siberia. Women in the Scythian tribes fought and rode alongside their men, and were also adorned with heavy jewelry. They were fearsome warriors, much like the mythical female Amazons. Another example are the Dahomey tribe of 17th century West Africa, who were the inspiration for the film Black Panther, which I love. Great movie. There's also the female Ashanti warrior women, led by Ya Asantewa, the warrior queen who led an army of thousands of male and female soldiers. There have also been societies where lineage was passed down from mother to daughter, known as matrilineage. In fact, most pre-agrarian societies were matrilineal because it made more sense. You know who the mother is, therefore you know who the child is coming from. Patrilineage became more about land and property ownership. Now, a lot of matrilineal societies were also still politically patriarchal in that men took on the more physically demanding jobs and professions in human societies because men are typically physically stronger and women are the ones who bear the children. However, matriarchies have also existed. For example, in China, the Masuo people live in a society where people don't marry, lineage is passed down from mother to daughter, and the grandmother is the head of the family, not the man. Women are responsible for property, household, and agriculture, while men are responsible for hunting animals and building homes. Women are even able to take on as many lovers as they choose, and paternity is not viewed as important. Such is similar in parts of rural Tibet, where polyandry has been rather commonplace for many years. And even if we do look at so-called patriarchal societies, women have still managed to work in certain professions. Nothing has stopped women from being able to actually have careers. Nursing has always been extremely female-oriented, so this pretty much debunks the idea that women have only ever been in the home. Nursing is a wonderful example of women using our unique female strengths for a very, very good purpose. There were even a group of important nurses in 1908 who served in the US Navy representing the Nurse Corps, known as the Sacred 20. Nuns also held prominent roles in the churches, and women contributed to additional domestic industries like textiles and basket weaving. There haven't been many English queens, not because of patriarchal oppression, but because, once again, men and women are different, and men were the ones expected to take on more responsibility to allow for women to be at home with their children where they could take care of them. Yet there have also still been female regal rulers, such as Queen Elizabeth I, one of the most important monarchs in English history. I doubt anyone would ever have called her oppressed. Even the late Queen Elizabeth II played a vital role in moving the monarchy forward into the modern age. Was she ever oppressed? Did she ever align herself with the feminist movement? I highly doubt it. All of this scratches the surface of buried history concerning women's roles throughout various parts of societies. To say that women have only ever been oppressed housewives since the dawn of time simply isn't true. Feminism does a terrible disservice to women by pushing this narrative. Women really need to move away from this harmful, toxic feminist narrative of false female oppression if we want to actually become empowered, rational females. Feminism is the only ideology which has ever told women that we are oppressed. Another thing I want to discuss is how patriarchal societies have actually benefited women, which is yet another thing that feminism completely ignores. I'm not saying that patriarchal systems are necessarily a good thing or even ideal for society. Most contemporary Western societies are no longer patriarchal, and this again is thanks to advances in medicine and technology via the industrial and digital revolutions. Patriarchal societies are necessary when resources are scarce and people have a shorter life expectancy, as, once again, men are the ones who take on the positions of power, while women are the ones who further our lineage and give birth to the children. But in today's world, patriarchal societies are not necessary. This has more to do with cultural evolution than feminism. Patriarchal societies created systems and structure that offered women protection to bear and raise children. One example is marriage. Marriage was set up during the agrarian age as a way to ensure that women were financially protected and cared for by a man while she was bearing her child. This is why women were expected to remain virgins until marriage, to ensure that when she married, the child she bore was the child of her husband. It became about the family unit. It was much harder for women to control their fertility back then, for obvious reasons, so if a woman slept around, she was probably going to end up with a bunch of kids from different fathers, which was perfectly fine in our hunter-gatherer age where we had a more communal tribal-based model of humanity, but in the post-agrarian feudal age, this wasn't such a good idea because of lineage and property ownership. Within the last several decades, condoms and birth control have been invented, meaning that women now don't have to worry so much about pregnancy, meaning that we're essentially free to sleep with whoever we want without having the risk of getting pregnant. It's true that the idea of ascribing value to female virginity is extremely cringe, and this idea mainly came from Christianity and their obsession with the Virgin Mary and Immaculate Conception. However, religion aside, the logic behind this was once again about sharing resources, dividing labor, and, believe it or not, protecting women. And yet, even though our society has changed and progressed, our psychology still remains as it did thousands of years ago. Most women still desire to feel protected and cared for by their male partners. Most women still prefer monogamous romantic relationships to casual sex. Most women still seek out a male partner who has a good, steady income and financial potential, and also the potential to be a good, loving father. These are all natural traits and are how humans have survived since the dawn of time. This only becomes oppressive when it is abused, and it has only ever been abused by a small minority of men. In most cases, a husband is the least likely person to mistreat and oppress his wife. A father is, again, one of the least likely people to oppress his daughter. Most men love and celebrate and cherish the women in their lives. Most men are taught from a young age to respect women and treat women with respect. Mothers have pretty much always been loved and celebrated. Look at the idea of the mother goddesses, Mother Gaia, Mother Earth. In fact, in today's world, the only societies where women are actually being systematically oppressed are in Islamic fundamentalist societies, and that's because they follow Sharia law, which is barbaric and antithetical to social progress, but the majority of the world is not like this. The military was, once again, created to protect women. In most patriarchal societies, men have been the ones expected to go out and fight and die in the name of their country. Men sending other men out to die while the women stayed at home. Again, this was all to protect women and children. Remember the Titanic, women and children first. The Birkenhead drill. The women are protected because we bear the children. There were no feminists on the Titanic. Feminism has really created such a strange, unhealthy, and unscientific way of looking at gender relations. Men worked to protect their women. Men toiled in the farm to care and provide for their wives and children. And women didn't just sit around doing nothing. As I said earlier, plenty of women still had careers, and most women cared for their children because they wanted to, because that's what good mothers are supposed to do. No good mother is going to just leave her children out to die on the street and watch them die. Everything men and women have done throughout human civilization has been about protecting the human race so that we can continue to survive and get to where we are today. We need to stop labeling the entire past as sexist and oppressive and understand that people did those things that they did so that we could live and flourish in the world that we live in today. We need to look at the past through much more nuance and move away from this reductive cultural Marxist narrative. Everything feminism has ever told us about women being oppressed since the dawn of time is a lie. The Myth of Male Power is an excellent book by Dr. Warren Farrell, all about how patriarchal societies were never about oppressing women, they were about protecting women. Men being chivalrous and holding open doors for women, buying a woman drinks or dinner, making sure she got home safe, putting his arms around her. All of these are examples of positive male behavior and how a man is supposed to behave towards a woman, especially a woman that he's in a relationship with. Even in a culture overrun by feminism, most men still do display positive behavior towards women. Men are taught to respect women from a young age. Maybe women need to learn to start respecting men. Instead of whinging about being oppressed, we should learn to appreciate the good men for all the good that they do in society. Most men are decent people and most women are decent people. We can work together rather than tearing each other down. No one is advocating a return to the past, least of all me, but we can take the best of the past and fuse it with the best of the present to create a better future. A future that is more about humanitarianism and supporting both men and women's contributions to this wonderful planet that we share, rather than misandric, historically inaccurate, anger-fueled feminism. But what are your thoughts on this? Do you agree with my assertions about patriarchy being a myth? Do you think that feminism has glossed over a lot of history? Or do you think that we do in fact live in a patriarchy and that women are systematically oppressed? Systemically? I always get those words mixed up. Are there any details that I glossed over that you think need expanding? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do consider subscribing to stay up to date with the content that I post, and also consider joining my Discord group, Liberals Against Feminism, to discuss feminism with like-minded people.